the entire world is encouraging you to accept the peace offer of the offer of a ceasefire and enter into peace talks.
For more, let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, former Green Beret and president of Root Pop Leadership. Thanks for joining us on this Labor Day. We appreciate it.
Hi, Molly.
Starting things off, you just had a chance to listen to the four-star general there departing, John Nicholson, and he's essentially called for an end to the war. How unusual is this as a departing message?
Well, first of all, I want to say a special thanks to General Nicholson for giving 31 months of his life, and more than that, really, to this campaign. I think it's a somber reminder that there is still a fight going on in Afghanistan. And I think if you listen closely to his words, what he's calling for, makes a lot of sense, is for the Taliban to come in and stop the fighting, and also for the leaders of Afghanistan to step up and take the reins. I don't think he's necessarily calling for an exit as much as he is for, the outcomes that we all want to see and that we've wanted to see there for the last 17 years. It's just time that we really focus in on trying to get there.
As a commander, he made it very clear today, still a very dangerous place. The engagement continues, and he clearly, this has weighed on him. Your thoughts as this element, as he begins, as he heads off after this journey. He spent 31 months there at the helm.
Absolutely, and honoring those men and women who have fallen is something we should never stop doing. My message today is to remember that we still have a lot of our sons and daughters over there fighting right now. We recently, lost more warriors over there. General Scott Miller, who's going in behind him, an equally able and capable commander. I mean, the nation is really fortunate to have these leaders coming in back to back. My message would just be for our politicians and our citizens at home. The fight is still raging over there, and we really cannot afford an unchecked safe haven in Afghanistan. It's hard to still be in this thing 17 years later, but it is an incremental process that requires us to stay engaged and keep building capacity over there, and it's going to be hard.
You mentioned the incoming General Austin Scott Miller. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
The world recognizes we cannot fail. I know this has been a long fight, and it has been generational. For us, for the Afghan people. I understand the reason we're fighting, and I know why we're here. And I know terrorists seek safe haven to export more murder, and attack the innocent, and threaten everybody's way of life.
He essentially sends this powerful message: Afghanistan cannot be a safe haven for terrorism. So while we see the outgoing commander saying, it's time for this war to end, the incoming commander making it clear that that won't be the case, and that there's still a job to be done, that we won't walk away if there is still work that has to be accomplished.
Well, look, Molly, not only do you have Al-Qaeda still festering in Afghanistan, but now you have ISIS as well. And these two terror groups are absolutely bent on projecting violence into the West and the United States. So General Miller's right, and nobody understands better how to approach that and denial of sanctuary than him. Not only on the kinetic lethal side, but I talk about General Miller in my book, Game Changers, the bottom-up approach that Green Berets and others used out in those outlying villages. He led that effort as well. He really understands it, and I really hope that our politicians and our policymakers give him what he needs to push this thing forward, because he knows how to do it.
What does this transition mean going ahead for Afghanistan, for our troops?
Well, it has the capacity, or it has the potential for capacity building, Molly. That's really the answer here, is that for the Afghans to stand up on their own, the same way in places like Colombia, where we've worked for decades to help them stand up against the FARC, where we've worked in the Philippines to help them stand up against lawlessness and insurgency. It takes time. What this transition represents is the opportunity to continue to build capacity at the Afghan government level, but also out in those outlying villages and with the military. It is a slow, go 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of process, but it's absolutely necessary, and General Miller understands that, and he's the guy that can lead that forward.
How do we move ahead? Where will the success be found? We see the outgoing general talking directly to the Taliban, the incoming general, in a sense, also doing that, in a sense, saying this won't be a safe haven for terrorism, talking really to the people of Afghanistan, to all these various factions that are making things more challenging. I mean, how do you find the common ground? How do we bring that together and end all of this?
Well, I think any leader in Afghanistan would like to see the Taliban, give up the fight, give up the insurgency, but at the same time, we also have some very hardcore global terror groups inside that country, Molly, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and those are going to have to be rooted out. So while you are going to see, I think, some very surgical targeting and a continuation of that, much like you've seen in Syria, the other results, it's not going to be a ticker tape parade. It's not going to be a declaration of victory, right? What it's going to be is an incremental movement towards capacity building where more and more the Afghans can stand up on their own at the governmental level, but also at a community level. Again, I talk about this in my book, Game Changers. Those communities, Molly, they have been decimated for 40 years. And just helping build community resilience from the bottom up with our special forces, our Green Berets, it's going to take some time. It took a long time to break it, and it's going to take a long time to help put it back together. So it will be slow and incremental, but hopefully what we'll see are Afghans standing up for themselves more and more as this thing continues.
All right, we thank U.S. General John Nicholson for his service, and also Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, thank you for your service, and thank you for your insights today.
Thanks, Molly. Have a great Labor Day.
You too.
All right, we switch topics now with the Fox News alert on trade as President Trump really blasting Canada over NAFTA with the trade talks set to resume Wednesday. The president vowing to negotiate better terms for the United States, calling the 25-year-old agreement, quote, one of the worst trade deals ever made. Here's a presidential tweet on the topic. We shouldn't have to buy our friends with bad trade deals and free military protection. Let's bring in Virginia Congressman Dave Brat. He's a member of the House Freedom Caucus, also serves on the House Budget Committee. Congressman, thank you for your time here on Labor Day. We appreciate that.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
You know, why or what do you make of the president's tough stance with regard to Canada, willing to go ahead with a new NAFTA deal without the Canadians on board, Mexico only, one of our oldest friends and allies, the Canadians. The president's being tough on them. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think he's fulfilling his pledge. He said, I'm going to take care of the American worker. And so if you look at the Mexican negotiation, that's what comes out of that. And I think the American people are seeing more broadly, there's nothing near free trade in any of this, right? The ultimate goal, the White House has said, Larry Kudlow said, is to get to no tariffs and free trade.
Right.
But when you look at the negotiation with Mexico, you see we're negotiating sector by sector, part by part by part, wage rate in each sector, wage rate for each part. I mean, there's no free trade to any of it. And so the best part of this is the American people are seeing, and then the lobbyists and the special interests, of course, have powerful moneyed interests up there to get their way. If you're big up there, you can lobby to have your piece of the trade deal negotiated your way. That's why we want free markets, so you don't have that political corruption buying off certain sectors, et cetera. So we're moving in the right direction, but it's tough.
You brought up the American worker, which I do want to speak of because there's been some debate about the quote-unquote American worker here over the last couple of days. The president's gotten involved in that. But one more specific question on Canada. The latest numbers I believe that we have come 2016 showing the U.S. with a $12.5 billion surplus with the Canadians. Now, the president cites this trade deficit. Whatever you make of it, there's back and forth on whether that's the best measure or not. But the president's used it a number of times, and not really an issue with Canada. So, again, why go so hard after them?
Well, I think it's just the disparities across the board that we're talking about. We want to have fair rules across the board so we don't have to continuously be renegotiating all these sector-by-sector deals. And when it comes to the American worker,
right.
I mean, what's been left off, the mainstream media doesn't capture, right? We grew at 4.2 GDP growth last quarter, and the Atlanta Fed has us at 4.6. And so what's the result there for the kitchen table, folks? My Democrat opponent wants to get rid of all the tax cuts and put in place tax increases to support, ending Medicare as you know it. Walmart shoppers, 100 million retail shoppers at Walmart broke retail records last week, right? That's unbelievable evidence that we are taking care of the American worker. The Democrats spin it because they got nothing else to do, right? They go negative on you because the overwhelming objective news is all good. Every
Right.
consumer sentiment, business capital investments through the roof, GDP group through the roof, African American, Asian,
Sure.
Hispanic unemployment rates at record low. So it's great news.
Those are good numbers. Those macro numbers are very good numbers, and that was kind of the basis
Yep.
for this debate I alluded to a couple of minutes ago.
Yep.
And the head of the AFL-CIO was on with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday yesterday.
Yep.
President Trump has since responded to his comments, but first let's listen to Richard Trumka. Here he is.
When he was elected, I said I would call balls and strikes. When he did something that was good for workers, we'd support him. When he did something that was bad for workers, we would oppose him. Unfortunately, to date, the things that he's done to hurt workers outpace what he's done to help workers. He hasn't come up with an infrastructure program that could put a lot of us back to work. He overturned a regulation that would actually deny over 5 million people overtime that they would have had. He overturned some health and safety regulations that will hurt us on the job.
More bad than good, essentially, Congressman, is his point. The response from President Trump, before I get your take on this, comes, of course, via Twitter, where he says Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, represented his union poorly on television this weekend. Some of the things he said were so against the working men and women of our country and the success of the U.S. itself that it is easy to see why unions are doing so poorly. He ends his tweet with a Dem! Exclamation point. Congressman Brad, your take.
Yeah, well, Trump's comments are just not objectively true. I did a PhD in economics. If you want to talk about the worker, the main thing that lifts the worker and their incomes and all the variables that go along with it that we want, education and infrastructure, et cetera, is GDP growth. If you don't believe it, look at China and India. They're deregulating, moving toward free markets, growing at 7 to 10%. And their people are thriving. Right when I started teaching economics, they made $1,000 a year per capita. Now they're up to $10,000. Due to free markets.
Right.
So Trumka's just totally out of touch with reality. He's talking about narrow inside Democrat talking points. He's not talking about economic evidence.
To
The
follow up on your
GDP
point,
growth
though,
pays for everything.
How much would a trade war, and this is a more broad question, if it were to break out even more than it has already, in particular with the Chinese, cut into that strong GDP growth that we have now? I've seen estimates maybe 0.5% or something like that, but how much would it cut into it, hurt us?
Yeah, I mean, everything I've read is less than 0.5%. And
Right.
the Democrat proposals are to end Medicare. That would require Medicare for all, $32 trillion tax increase, which would double the personal rate and the corporate rate. And what would that do? That's never covered, right? The Democrat proposals are so absurd on their face, that would put you not into recession, but into a depression. And then they want open borders. What's that do for the worker? Wage rates down, and you get rid of the tax cuts, and the record unemployment rates go away.
Right.
And so that's the real contrast in the big numbers. The trade piece is a short-run dispute that's hopefully 3 to 6 months
3 to
in order
6
to get
months, okay.
long-run economic growth. Yeah, and that's the...
Yeah, that's the debate about whether the Chinese can last longer, but we'll get into that on another day. But it is an interesting economic discussion. And Congressman Brad, thank you for coming on. Enjoy what's left of your holiday weekend. We appreciate it.
All right, we'll do. Off to the parade. Thank you, guys.
Have fun, Molly.
A shocking new report saying doctors may have figured out what's behind the mysterious illnesses